Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, everybody. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Duncan Autrey from Fractal Friends podcast, and he's actually got a mediation business in San Francisco as well. Is it mediation or conflict resolution more accurately? So definitely an interesting character. We get into a little bit of a situation he got himself into, or somebody else got him into, in New York State. And I think you're going to like this one. It was a really great way to kind of unpack some of the problems I've been seeing out here in psychedelia. It's kind of frustrating for a lot of us. And, you know, is somebody redeemable? Like, if they've done something bad, you know, how do we deal with that kind of stuff as a community? Perhaps there's some sort of like a semi-permanent dunce cap you wear. I don't know what the solution is, but at least having the conversation opens up the possibility of a resolution in the future, maybe. So I hope you like this one. You know, perhaps a little different from before, but relevant to our current state in psychedelia. There's all sorts of problems coming up, and we need to figure out how to handle it. So it's enough with that intro. Enjoy the show with Duncan Autrey. If you want to support us, there's a number of ways. We have a Patreon page where you can leave a small monthly donation, and depending on how much you leave, you get various rewards. So we would love to have you support us there. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. If you want to get educated, we got books. We've got 2 books online on our shop, an integration guide and a trip journal. You can check that stuff out at psychedelicstodayshop.com. Also on that shop are shirts, stickers, all sorts of cool stuff. So check it out. Some of my favorite sweatshirts have come from that store now. Incredibly soft and beautiful. Editor of the show, Marissa, has done a lot of designs for us and helped us out quite a bit. And yeah, that shop is a great place to support us. And, you know, holiday season is upon us. If you want to give one to your friends, maybe now's the time. So without further ado, Duncan Autrey on Psychedelics Today. Thank you all for tuning in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I am Joe Moore. Today on the show, we have Duncan Autrey. He has a podcast called Fractal Friends and is also provides mediation services and anything else.
Yeah, conflict transformation, helping people do conflict better.
Yeah, so you and I got to meet in Boulder, and you gave me a really cool card and a great sticker that's on my favorite water bottle now. And yeah, that was a fun dinner. And I got to learn a little bit about like your project, and you kind of convinced me a lot that I need to understand conflict better in order to like get through it a little bit more productively for everybody.
Yeah. Awesome.
So maybe let's chat about that for just a minute. Like, what is conflict, and like why do we need a more intelligent approach to this thing?
Thank you. Yeah, conflict is basically just a product of living in a diverse world. Like, as long as we live in a world where we have people who have different perspectives, then we're going to have disagreements about how we should do things. And the choice is then not to just have one of those choices win, but instead try to figure out how to get these different perspectives working together. I like to say that like conflict is this opportunity to find out what people really care about the most. If you're finding someone who's emotionally charged about something, then it means that it's found something they really care about. So if you can show that person that you respect this thing and you can try to make space for that, then you're able to develop like a lot deeper intimacy. You know, we can get closer and build together. And if we try to tell people that that thing that's important to them is wrong, then we're going to go into some destructive cycle. And so it's basically our choice of whether or not we make it into a generative experience or a destructive experience.
Mm-hmm. I can see a lot of this out there right now. I'm fighting a few battles that I won't really name on the show. But yeah, there's stuff that's going on in the psychedelic world. It's really rough, and it's hard to, it's hard for me to imagine a good path forward, but I know there is. It's just a matter of like, you know, coming up with the willpower and time to really dig into it.
It's like, it's like this happens because people are very passionate about what the issue is, right? It's like a topic that is, people get into this because they really are really passionate about it. And when you find something that people are passionate about, then they're not, the risk of of not getting to win or not having success is high, right? And then the thing I kind of like to point out is that like we have to figure out like what is like behind that conflict, right? Like what is the actual thing that you want? Not the like, not how do you get there, but like what, like how do we, it's like, what are the underlying needs here? Like, what is the stuff that we can both agree on that are important? And can we acknowledge that we're in relationship no matter what? And that the only way of figuring this out is together. And once you sort of realize that there's like, we all win or we all lose here, then you start having to, even if you disagree with each other, you can at least agree that we're gonna have to experiment with new ways of going forward, right? We're gonna have to try it out because we're not gonna be able to do it separate from each other.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting how fractal this is, Fractal Friends. It's like the micro and the macro, right? Like how are we going to do this globally and in our interpersonal relationships and perhaps our relationships with nature too. Like there's a lot of stuff going on here.
Absolutely. Humanity and nature within our country and then also within ourselves too. We can find that similar quality of conflict. One person says, like all conflict reduces just to one question. It's, I have something really cool that I want to share with the world, but in order to do that, I have to do it with other people and they have other ideas, you know? And so, and that's true across all of it. So it's like, I want to make space for you in this conversation. You want to make space for me in this conversation, but we also want to make sure we say what we want to say too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've observed conversations go down that are just absurd in their dynamic of neither party hearing anything close to what the other is hearing, and they're just battling back and forth. I'm sure you've seen it even professionally.
Yeah, one of my great friends says conflict happens when someone wants to be heard so much that they stop listening to the other side. And you're like, oh yeah, of course. But then you're like, oh, wait a minute. If both of them want to be heard and neither one's, the tool to be heard is to stop listening, then I know eventually you have to acknowledge that maybe I don't have the whole answer and maybe, you know, like there's something here. Generally, that's kind of what that card I gave you tells you is like, if you could just listen to someone like thoroughly as possible, that's the quickest way to make sure that they'll listen to you. You have to actually listen to them all the way through, make sure you've heard them, make sure they know you've heard them. And then they'll say, oh, wait, what was it you were trying to tell me again?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I do a lot of this kind of thing professionally in my software job, and that is kind of the superpower that you can develop out of anything in software. It's listening very deeply. You know, you also have to have some technical, but first off is because you can have technical and not know how to listen to. But if you can listen, you can get really far in that world. You know, for what it's worth. I don't advise people go into software, but you know, if people want to, go for it.
For sure. People in the design field, like marketing, like you have to listen to your client, figure out what they want before you try to make anything. Yeah. If you try to create something, listening first.
So I want to read the listening part of your card, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Listening non-judgmentally to others helps them heal, open, and grow. How can you show that you care? Acknowledge their experience, reflect back what you hear, and be curious and ask questions. 3-step process. Yeah, and that in and of itself should really, may not necessarily resolve conflicts, but at least tone them down quite a bit, right? Is that what you see?
Yeah, for sure. It's like definitely like a de-escalation technique to sort of actually show that you're listening and you're acknowledging the person has a right to have whatever experience they're having. If someone's really hot in a conflict, you probably should just go take a break, come back to it half hour. First of all, that's the first advice. But there's a mnemonic for that. It's the arc of conversation. A is acknowledge, R is reflect back, and C is be curious. And you can just kind of pick and choose those, right? Just like just, ask another question and then reflect it back. And generally reflecting back is like really funny because it feels like it's really forced. You can literally just tell people exactly what they just said. And they'll be like, wow, that's amazing. They really appreciate it, even though it seems like they must be like forced, right? That they'll notice what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You also have to get out of your ego out of it too. If you reflect back what someone says, even if you get it right, they might say, no, I didn't say that. And then now you really get to listen because they're going to clarify.
So I'm sure some listeners out there are wondering, why are we talking about conflict resolution?
Yeah.
In the psychedelic world, there's a few things that are common patterns, maybe. I'd say like the first two are you become extremely uncertain of everything, or you become extremely certain of everything. And that's like really hard to resolve. It's like, why are you so certain that you're now Jesus, or that you need to, tear down society? Why are you so certain? But people become super certain from psychedelic experiences sometime, and that's really tough. But I think people hearing this can then say, let's maybe reflect on that. let's understand that, yes, you are God, but so is everybody else. Like that kind of a normal, however normal that is to the psychedelic world set of axioms, that's a pretty common one.
And like being certain about your own experience or your own memories is fine, but it's not mutually exclusive to other people being certain about their experiences. So you can be like, here's what I remember. And the other person can be like, well, here's what I remember. And then you kind of have to go, okay, cool. So we both remember these different things, but you can't say I remember this, and so you're wrong. Like that's the edge. Yeah.
Yeah. So, play with that, people. I know many of you probably haven't run into this, but at least a handful of you have run into this problem. Maybe yourself or with close friends. Like the DMT experience can be true for you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be universalized. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. So, just tread lightly there. And, play nice with each other. So it's this is all play, and figuring out the dynamics of the game is really helpful sometimes and can lead to happier outcomes.
Yeah.
Trying to think of some other examples. So there's environmental impact issues right now that are going on. Like peyote is becoming extremely overharvested. From what I understand, ayahuasca is okay, but it's kind of like touch and go. There's kind of two sides to that story. And then there's like the Bufo alvarius toad, the 5-MeO DMT. That's like in a desert ecosystem similar to peyote. And they take a long time to grow to maturity, and people are kind of over harvesting right now. There's no real studies to show that they're endangered yet, but that is a problem in desert ecosystems. They're really fragile, especially if they're being manipulated by humans with machines. However you want to take that. So like this is one thing I think we need to discuss in the psychedelic world more, is how do we understand ecological issues better and work with each other to have sensible, perhaps precautionary principle type conversations around this. When hearing me say that, does anything come up for you?
Yeah, well, I think especially some of these ones you're talking about here, these are substances that are provoking like deep levels of inspiration, causing a lot of transformative experiences that can have people wanting to do a lot of great good in the world, right? Like these experiences seem to be important. I've heard people talk about how ayahuasca and 5-MeO DMT, like this can actually transform people's lives and really move them into a way of experiencing the world that can be really positive. And so this is like something worth fighting for. And they're high risk. These are resources that are scarce. And so there's an edge of, let's get it out there, but then also you have to look at the shadow side, which is like, this is a limited resource and we have to be really thoughtful about it. I've heard people say that it's really important for example, people to have a practice a spiritual practice beyond this work so that they can actually integrate these things and so they can actually use it, or like actually put things into action. But on the other side, of course, we're trying to save the world. We want to save these frogs and cactuses and vines and things. And like, we want to save that for future generations. But the choice to put restrictions is the shadow side there, right? When you start restricting something, then maybe it's not going to be, you're going to run into challenges there. And so generally in conflict, you can sort of find when you have this conflict that just keeps on going over and over again, you find out each side has something sort of positive and each side has something a little negative. And if you can acknowledge your shadow side and you can uplift the wisdom of the other side, like as a starter for a conversation, or just be able to acknowledge that all of that's happening, then you can also see that the other side is the antidote for your extreme and vice versa, right? Like, so the voice that's like, hey, we got to put a bunch of rules and restrict things, like, well, then like, well, that's a pretty closed down world. We need more liberation. We need to give people more freedom of their mind and their consciousness and what they're doing. But if you go liberation too far and people start doing whatever they want all over the environment, then that's too much. We got to like be careful. We're not leaving too much of an impact. So let's go back to what are the rules we want. And so it becomes like this dance, and each side can sort of like pull, like is like perfectly designed to help the other one bring forward its best self and sort of check its danger, But they have to acknowledge that they're in that. You can sort of, usually you can sort of map those out. It's called an interdependent polarity.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. That's great. Hearing a Native American woman speak at the psychedelic conference in Oakland, I think it was last April or March, and she had this really interesting conversation about how in her tradition and in her family and tribe, they really exclusively for spiritual purposes use wild peyote, and that greenhouse grown peyote would not be okay for them to use for their religious purposes, which is a very interesting conversation, which I landed on the point of, okay, like let's let them have that. And, gringos and people who aren't in that tradition deeply, why don't we use the greenhouse grown? Unfortunately, prohibition is in place and that makes it a little tougher, but, I think that sounded like a really sensible move, unless they have a conversation track around it being disrespectful to the spirit of the plant, which could be a thing they would bring up. And then I don't know where to go from there. That's where I would get stuck. Or be like, let's go into some more conversation here. No,
for sure. I got a chance to work on with ICEERS, which is a International Committee for Ethnobotanical Education Research.
Sounds great.
Something like that, more or less. Yeah, they're great. And they were working on a code of ethics for ayahuasca, and I was the World Ayahuasca Conference, and I was helping them with like the public conversation about it. When I was there, I was just mentioning that, like, look, there's some like hard lines. We know things we don't want to do, like the ethical questions. We can be like, okay, that's definitely outside of the boundaries. We can think about laws as these sort of guidelines, these guardrails, sort of telling us, hey, look, go outside of that line, things get a little gnarly. But where the line gets actually drawn and what we actually choose to do, that's like an infinitely nuanced question, because it has to relate to all these billions of humans and time and contexts and all that. And so it's worthwhile knowing where we want to put some of the boundaries. We don't want to get to the place where we're drawing the super hard lines, because those hard lines become that they're rigid, and so kind of the idea, one of the fractal ideas about conflict is like, look, we can find right and wrong. We can sort of see like that happened, whatever, but the amount of detail it's going to take is going to be really personal. So it's better for us to come up with a system of navigating the question than it is to try to answer the question, right? Like, we're going to have an ongoing question about environment, impacts, freedom, consciousness, all these questions. And like, we should figure out what are the ways we want to answer that question. Like, what are the values we want to bring to that? Like, that's something we can work on, but it's a little more different than to say, look, you can never do greenhouse grown peyote, or it always has to be wild, or it never can be wild, or only indigenous people can do it. Like, that's fine. You can draw that line, but we don't really want to put a bunch of rules and laws on this whole thing, you know?
Yeah. I'm kind of a, unpopular words, but like anarcho-libertarian type person, you know, in the spirit of kind of Burning Man ethics, but and permaculture ethics, but it's complicated. Yeah. I don't want to see legislation. Like, obviously the DEA isn't doing great. Same, FDA is doing kind of okay, but they're real slow pokes, and it's kind of a political organization too. And yeah, like environmental regulation hasn't always worked the best. The fact that, the president can just take things off the table, it's unbelievable. Like EPA, you're now half the funding, like that kind of stuff.
Totally. I mean, like, the law is like not really a final solution. Like, I worked on these mining conflicts when I was living in Argentina, like doing like research on it. And they like made a law that said that kind of mining would not happen in like 2006. And then 2008, they like repealed the law and the mining company was back. And like, what are you guys trying to do now? Like, we want a law to protect that. And I'm like, no, you guys just did that. Like, the law is not actually they're going to save you. And then of course the law can go really bad sometimes. Sometimes it's intervening in our lives in ways that's not ways we don't want.
It's interesting. There's kind of like a hierarchy of permanence on the planet, and like laws are kind of really low. Humans seem to last a little bit longer than laws do. Most of the time, I guess, these days at least. Yeah. And it's an interesting concept. And people, be aware. Like, if you're psychedelically minded, or like thinking about conflict, realize that if a law gets passed, it's probably temporary.
Right. It's temporary, or it'll last for a really long time and get detailed and lose its context. But like, there's basically three ways we resolve conflict throughout time. First is power. Like, if I'm stronger than you, I win. That war, violence, we could do that. Laws was like a great invention. It's like 1,000 years ago. People are like, hey, let's come up with one set of rules for everyone. And that's great. But the people in power made those rules and the rules tend to be fixed, and they're never going to be detailed or nuanced enough to sort of capture this human experience here. And so the interest-based model, which is like kind of what modern conflict resolution is based on, like what are your interests and what are my interests in this context, in this place, separate from anyone else's experience here. And that means we have to talk to each other, actually, but it lifts up this idea of self-determination, that we get to like determine our own lives, that we actually have the answers to our own problems. Now, you might have to talk to your enemies, and you actually might affirm that they also get to be here. But when you get into that conversation, you can actually figure out the details. Otherwise, you can just pull up your sign and just be like, hey, this is what I think, and this is the one answer in a sentence. But nothing gets reduced to that level, Even with jurisprudence over years, we keep on refining it, but we're not ever really going to get there. Right.
Yeah. It's this like infinite regress of like law and, quote unquote, I guess science. We could be doing law and science for millions of years and not reach the end goal, theoretically.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And
understand everything's a little bit better over and over again. Just more. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And, I guess realizing that stuff is iterative too, and that might help chill out your frustration. Science is provisional truth in a lot of ways. Like, let's say like what's true today could be very disproven 10 years out, 2 years out, whatever, 2 weeks out.
Yeah. I mean, we just did like a workshop about the scientific method. We was hosting a little discussion group about it. And, we were talking about like, look, if you still just get to base it on the evidence that you have. Right. And so, someday like Earth is flat. Look, you can go to the top of the mountain, look, experiment. Yep. Looks like it's flat. Okay. Like check. Right. And then you get to fly out into space and go, okay, wait, new experiment. Now we have new evidence. Looks like it's round, like now we can see it. But then later we'll figure out that we live in 5 dimensions and it's actually a torus or something. And like, and then new information, and that'll be obvious at that point. Like you only get to run like science doesn't really, it doesn't ever actually proves anything. It just shows you what's replicable, right? Like the scientific method will just say, look, if you do this, this will happen. And it seems to point to this hypothesis that I've made. But you can always refine it more and more. And, and same thing with laws and rules and all that.
Genius. Yeah, my philosophy teacher, my undergrad, kind of was jamming the idea of toroidal structure of the cosmos into my brain. It was pretty trippy. Universe as a donut or an apple. I'm like, okay, I get it. Kind of not really, but I'll accept it. And based on old science, like I don't know if it's true anymore or not, but this is like 1950s stuff, 1970s data. Yeah. So, when you work with all sorts of folks, then you do workshops for groups and individuals too.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found most interesting in this work? Like, trying to think of examples for my question. Just most impressive resilience in humans, maybe. Like they were never going to do it, and then all of a sudden there was a miracle or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it like shifts happen is like this slogan, and then the thing, and it's usually just like the most general shift is people start thinking that I'm a good guy and dealing with this other bad guy, and well, like sounds like a really bad situation you're in. And then I'll call the other person up, and there's also another good guy facing a bad guy, and I've never really found purely bad guys. It's always two people sort of miscommunicating, basically. And so the process of like any kind of mediation or facilitation is like here's you get them to sort of tell what their story is for the first time without being interrupted, and then once you've gotten people to really see, oh wow, you're a full person and I'm a full person and we both have different perspectives, and this mediator here seems to acknowledge that we're both not insane, so you can't, it's like you open Pandora's box, you can't go backwards anymore. And so then the process is, well, what are we going to do about this? Like, what are the things we need to talk about? So it starts becoming like creative brainstorming. But then eventually, like, there'll be this moment where people go, oh, okay. Like, I see, like, wait, what if we just do it this way? Like, somehow coming up with examples is always hard for me sometimes. But I was like this one where it was like these like person, they're mad about their trees, right? And like, hey, what are the trees blocking my view? The person's like, I don't really care about the tree. Like, I don't really care. And this person's like, well, I have a gardener who like comes, all the time to prune my trees. And so, maybe I can just have them just take your whole tree down. But then eventually I have this moment where they're like, whoa, wait a minute. The gardener is coming to take care of your trees. It could take care of the other trees at the same time. And then you have the problem solved. And they're like, oh my gosh. The trick is that I can't say that. They have to find it on their own,
Right.
And yeah. But I mean, it's 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 a challenge to recognize that we're all in this together, though I think that for me, like the piece that I'm always really trying to touch on is like, we all have a role here and we have a role to play in the whole. That's what the sticker I gave you says. And like, it's like, just as soon as we can affirm that the other person gets to be here, then we need to then it shifts the question to how we're going to do this better, Yeah.
Another big issue we're seeing is law enforcement stuff in our world. There's some folks out there who are getting super inflammatory. Like there are no good cops, like foot soldiers of the drug war, all this kind of inflammatory language. Yeah. I can say that I've only had a handful of really negative interactions with the police. I'm, a young white guy from the Northeast, so of course that's the case. And I didn't come from an underprivileged background, so of course I had less bad stories growing up. But I did see some bad shit, and I heard of some bad shit, and trying to strike this balance, like, who else are you going to call unless we come up with some sort of private law enforcement group, which sounds like a fantasy to me. If something fucked up happens at your house, like how would you talk to somebody like a radical anti-police person about that? Or
no, well, I have a lot of thoughts and some experience about this topic. I think the first thing, though, just to answer that question is, like, it's important to recognize the difference between the system and the individuals, right? Like, the drug war is explicitly racist. That was like built into it by what's his name, Henry Anslinger.
Yep,
like
exactly.
That was like totally intentional, and it's like specifically in Vendetta against Billie Holiday. It's really intense.
Ugly story.
Yeah, my gosh, makes me so sad. First person to get killed by the drug war. So that's systemically racist. The way that it impacts Black neighborhoods, Black people 5 to 10 times is more impacted by than white people when the rate of drug use is the same. But then it's worth recognizing that distinction is like these individuals that are maybe doing racist things, that are participating in that racist system. Like, they might be individuals just playing out their job based on the information they have. And there's a lot of, our society definitely is influencing that to make it look scary, right? Making people who do use drugs to seem like they're really scary individuals. And so police, treat them very intensely. And so our whole system, our television, our movies, is all feeding into this. And so that's implicit bias is like just getting built in to the system. So it's like someone who's doing something that's really, really fucked up is like not the same as someone, like, it's worth recognizing that might be because they're just playing out their role in the system, or it can be like an actual individual doing something intentional. But generally, people aren't so intentionally bad. There are sociopaths in this world, and they're actually like a 5% of the population, which is for me like crazy to imagine. So they're out there, and I sense that they're also disproportionately falling into roles of prison guards and so forth. Last summer, I was in New York giving a talk about the fractal nature of conflict, and at a festival called Fractal Fest. It's kind of a fun moment, and it was really sweet, and taught people about the rules of conflict and all these wonderful things. And then gave out the buttons telling everyone they have a role in the whole, and it was really nice. And and then on the way out, the person who was giving me a ride, he got in trouble with some undercover police officers. He might have sold them things, and they pulled us over, and we got our car totally searched. And I had a bag of vitamins with me that were just totally unmarked, and given the context, looked really sketchy. And they charged me. They didn't go all the way to charge it. I never got indicted, but the police said, basically told the judge that it looked like I had 28 grams of MDMA on me. And it's not that I've not broken rules in my life, but I've never seen that much drugs in my life. So, and that was intense. And I got arrested, and I spent 4 days in jail. And my observation was, like, very quickly, was that this is a place where the people who are the good guys, people who are on the right side of the law, are acting like assholes. And the people who are the bad guys, people who are on the wrong side of the law, quote unquote bad guys, right? Like, they're on their best behavior. They're really following the rules. Yes, they're being kind. And the thing that really caught me, and I think that this is a place where I think we really should be concerned about the way the police is happening, and also why we can see it's a systemic issue, is that my humanity just basically got taken away from me, like, right away. They treated me as though anything bad that happened to me now, any discomfort was my bad. And that's because there's this idea in our society that, like, if you do something good or you do something bad, that actually makes you a good person or a bad person. And I know that I wasn't any better or worse of a person because I got caught or didn't get caught. Just as the people who 19 people got arrested at this festival, and and some of them probably did have drugs or got convicted of that, and they're also not good people or bad people because they're in there. But our society actually really feeds into that story. Like, definitely, I remember getting treated like by my father and people like, wait, are you a good guy or a bad guy? Like, they couldn't tell anymore. And it was really interesting to notice how, wait, what? How are we doing this? And also just like shout out, there was a prison strike that just happened from the end of August to the beginning of September. And prisoners all over the nation were striking and boycotting and doing sit-ins to protest like the really inhumane conditions that they're living in. And so like that system is absolutely like inhumane and problematic. And especially since majority of people are there because of drugs and, and non-violent offenses. And the majority of those are just possession, and so that's a serious problem. And that is something we can get angry about. The individuals, like, it's a totally different question.
Right. That's fascinating. There's a lot there. Like, yeah, being thought of as a bad person for one situation. And yeah, I can tell for sure, people I know, if you get arrested for any drug, like you're now the Antichrist. And, that's just wild to me. Solving that's a real big problem to work on for folks out there.
What I would say is, like, first of all, just talk about this, like realize that these people still get to have their humanity. Like, that's something that's really important. And I think we need to hold that as we look at people doing other crimes. Like, like Me Too movement right now is, Bill Cosby's got put in jail 3 to 10 years right now. And like doing some really, really horrible things. And he's also still human. And, and if, we have to, if we're going to believe in this like right of people to be, like, if we're going to sort of, care about our shared humanity and the right for everyone to be here, then we have to figure out how to hold that. And we have to be able to have this idea of like, how can this be fixed? Like, what's the path to restoration? How do we even get there? And as long as we like, don't want to look at it, as long as we keep on just pretending like, well, I'm on the outside, so I'm fine. We will, like, we're kind of not really letting ourselves look at it, and I think that that's like somehow just got to be like a really important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if I flip that around to say like the police aren't necessarily bad folks. They're people with jobs and families, hopes and dreams and a childhood, maybe some grandchildren, and, maybe they're the best person in the world. Maybe not, but,
right. Well, exactly. And it's like they're playing this job out, but then you also have this cultural backing that is like willing to turn a blind eye if they treat people poorly, and that's just like, I mean, we see people getting arrested, like a lot of, scary things that we see are happening, we get someone on video, the police roughing someone up or something like that. But like, that is like almost like nothing compared to what's actually going on into prisons. And like, something I don't think people many know, but like, when the 13th Amendment got written in the United States saying that slavery was illegal, they also had a caveat there, and they said, except in the case that someone gets convicted of a crime, then slavery is still okay. And so
we just had a vote about that in Colorado.
Oh yeah. In Colorado, I remember it's like last April, Whole Foods had people working for 10 cents an hour, packing up their food, until someone complained about it and they stopped. And that was in Colorado that was happening. And like, so like, yeah, so it's really intense. Victoria's Secret has people working prison slavery, making lingerie in South Carolina, and so like the one guy who got arrested with me at Fractal Fest, he wrote me a letter, and he was paying. He had saved up $50 before he got moved to a new prison. And when he got there, they took that money away because he owed fees for the costs of his prison. So they didn't have any money. And then he got a new job paying 18 cents an hour, but they take 40% of that off. And this is the newest thing I just learned because I've been kind of digging into this. It's like people are also having to pay off the debt of the cost of their own incarceration. So people are coming out of prison with $30,000, $100,000 worth of debt that they have to pay off before they can get a driver's license, with a job that they have to say if they have a criminal record, and a society that doesn't believe that they've already been restored, right? So like, you're still a bad person even if you've done 10 years in prison, and then you have to pay $100,000 of debt. And like, you know, I see people in grad school paying off the grad school debt, and they're suffering a lot, but they're like having education, like all these hopeful things. But imagine paying off all that debt. Like, there's no better choice than just like, let me just go back into prison, man. Fuck this.
Yeah. Like getting both sides of that is really incredible, because we understand then like how poorly we're executing on, you know, the goal, which ostensibly is rehabilitation.
Right.
And turning you into a good citizen again. And it's like all these kind of, I hate to call them mutants, but they kind of seem like moral mutants out there doing some really crazy things to plenty of other people. Like just the concept of putting somebody in a cage for a year is unbelievable to me. But, you know, let's put them in there for 30 years for a joint. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. That reminds me, I've been noticing that like now that marijuana is getting legalized all over the place. By the way, I heard someone a couple of years say that we can probably call checkmate on the drug war, which I think is really interesting. Like, you know, it's still to play out, but
I think we're there.
Marijuana is getting played out, is getting legalized all over the place. And there's very little work and very little conversation about the people who are in jail right now for possession of marijuana and how they're getting out. And different states are working on it in different ways, but they still have to go through a legal process because there's not really a way to retroactively cancel laws unless I don't even know, but it's not much of a topic. And I think that it's really concerning that this was a justice issue. And then now people haven't really followed through on that. We got to get those people who are in jail for marijuana in Colorado and California and Washington and Oregon out of jail. Like seems like a really important cause.
That's a big deal. And we should be doing that immediately.
And I also just want to, sorry, I'm here going on it, but I want to just talk a little bit about like the getting pulled over and the rights there, because I've learned more about that, and I think it might be useful for your audience.
Yeah, we've not touched it.
Yeah. So let's go. So first thing was, you know, we know you have the right to remain silent. That's real. That's like really important. Like all the information you're sharing is like getting recorded. And so when I was there and they asked me like, hey, is this your bag of vitamins? And I'm like, yeah. What is it? I'm like, well, it's vitamins and supplements. The court transcript says that it's vitamins and something else. And also the court transcript doesn't include what I described, what they were, right? I'm like, those are amino acids. That's, you know, like that's 5-HTP. Like they didn't hear me explaining that. So that wasn't in it. So like they already were using it as evidence against me. The next thing is like right to consent for a search like that. You don't always say no. If someone's asking if they can look in your car, it's because they believe that you have, they believe you're guilty, and they know that it's illegal for them to search you unless they have permission. And so, you know, so you should almost never do that. Like you don't have to do that. If they do say that they have a right to do it or they have probable cause, like that's fine. You can sort that out in court, but like that, they know that they can't do it. So that's really important. Another thing that I also just learned, I almost no people know about this, but there was a case in the Supreme Court a couple of years ago called Regress versus the United States. And this guy got pulled over for a traffic stop. And then the police car was like, hey, do you mind if you let my dog sniff around your car? And he's like, nope, not going to let you search my car. And they're like, no, you hold on tight here. We're going to do it anyways. And then they got him to get out of his car. And then the dog's there. And they ended up finding like some methamphetamine in his car, like pretty significant amount. We took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. Whoa. Because the Fourth Amendment says that you can't be detained without probable cause. You can't be search and seizure, like you're just protected from that. So if someone pulls you over, they do have a probable cause to detain you on the side of the road. Enough time it takes for you to give you the parking violation or the traffic violation. They give you speeding ticket, but they can't have you stay longer and just try to wait to see if they can catch you for a crime. So like the question is like, you don't refuse to have your car searched, but then also you just ask, am I free to leave? Because you are, right? And so anyways, like they can't just like sit around and try to like see if they can find some rule that you've broken. That's unless they have a probable cause, And by the way, smoking marijuana smell apparently is probable cause even in places where it's legal. So be careful with that one. So
right, they can't smell edibles on your breath. So
exactly.
Well, thank you for that. I do recall hearing about it maybe just like a few weeks ago though, which is interesting that it's just coming about for me now. And that's a big deal. I'm kind of becoming a proponent for Dashcams too, for people to like have their own recording so that the policeman doesn't, exclusively have one recording. But I'm nervous about the police like destroying that or something. But I think that could be a really, if you had a receipt and like at least one or two shots of it being on your dashboard and then it was destroyed and removed from the car at the time of the altercation, then it's pretty good data.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was in in jail in New York and thinking about it for a couple of days, and I actually was wondering like, wait, like by charging like that huge charge, like how long is it going to take until they figure it out? And how embarrassed are they going to be? Like, might they be tempted just to like swap it out with something else and switch the evidence around or something? And so I asked my attorney about this, and he's like, these people aren't as skilled or as like, like they're not actually as corrupt as this team. They're just doing their jobs, and the level of like he's like, that's super unlikely. Like it's not as dynamic as crazy as it sounds. Like
it's really hard to move evidence around too. That's pretty tightly controlled, unless you're in the middle of nowhere in New York and it's a small police station. You never know. It's but it's worth thinking about, right? But these guys aren't masterminds. They're not running huge international syndicates. They're local police officers typically. Typically a decent education. But
it was like they'll lie to you about things, and they'll tell you like they don't have to tell the truth. That's no law about that. But they also were like really not competent. Like they really didn't know what they were talking about or what they were looking at. It was like really interesting to see. And this isn't true of everyone, but it's like really that I think was also useful information. That's not like they're not exactly not masterminds. It's
once in a while you'll find that person that's a wildly skilled sociopath that's a genius and can do some really wild stuff. But I think your number is helpful there, 5% or so sociopaths in the human population. So watch out.
Yeah. And by the way, I was asking like, where are these people? Like, how is that even possible? Actually, I have a friend whose son is a sociopath. And so I was like, talking about it. And she's like, oh, they're in corporate businesses. They're actually the CEOs of corporations. That's why they can justify that. I'm like, wait, are you serious? And they're like, oh yeah. How do you think someone could justify doing horrible things like to impact so many people? Like, so anyways, that's apparently prison guards and CEOs.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think we've got to unfortunately wrap up. I've had a great time. Yeah. This is why I got to start doing a 3-hour podcast. So we can actually dig into stuff someday.
Yeah. I always same question with my own podcast. I'm always like, oh man, we could really go deeper, but then also I don't want to listen to 3-hour podcasts. So
Not every time. Not every time. I love a good long Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss once in a while, but not every week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how can people find you?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You're
just curious how people can find you online, your websites, and anything else you want to share in the closure here.
Yeah, no, for sure. So my podcast is called Fractal Friends, and some interviews interesting for this audience. I just interviewed the manager of Zendo, Ryan Beauregard, and we talk about that kind of work. There's also an episode where I tell my whole story about getting arrested recently, and episode that I'm putting on today, end of September, is all about this conflict transformation concept and how do we build a world for all of us. I'm calling it the future of democracy.
Cool.
So that's really cool. Fractalfriends.us is the website. And then I'm Duncan Autrey, and DuncanAutrey.com is my sort of professional website. And if you want to talk about conflict, if you have issues you're trying to sort out, you want to find a new way of thinking about them, you want your team to get some better conflict resolution skills, you want paradigm shift, you want me to talk about the fractal nature of conflict for you, reach out. I'd be happy to. And you can you can schedule an appointment with me on my website.
Oh, fantastic. So it's not just in person, you do online work as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely can do some, I'm happy to, definitely talk to individuals on the phone. And then, of course, I'm happy to go wherever you want me to go. Yeah. Also have a newsletter that has good stuff in it too, so you guys can check that out.
Cool. At your main website, DuncanAutrey.com?
Yeah, at both websites. It'll pop right up. You kind of can't avoid it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love doing that. So thank you, Duncan. It's been really a pleasure, and I can't wait to bump into you again.
Yeah, Joe, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you. Yeah.
And there you have it, Duncan Autrey, Psychedelics Today. What'd you think? Let us know. We really want to hear from you over at Psychedelics Today, email@gmail.com. And if you want to support us, we do love small monthly donations, small, medium, or large size monthly donations to keep the lights on here. The expenses have gone up for us, and we're really trying to grow to bring you the most value we can. So if you want to see more from us, Patreon's a great way to support us. So check that out, patreon.com/psychedelics today. And if you want to check out our shop, psychedelicstodayshop.com, linked from our main site too. You can check out books and merch and consulting calls and whatever you're up for, coaching services. If you have a problem you want to work through over the course of a few phone calls, we're happy to help you out with that. So check it out, psychedelicstodayshop.com. And again, as always, we really appreciate you listening to this show. It's what allows us to keep doing the show. So keep on listening, keep on sharing. Love you guys. This is Joe Moore signing off from Breckenridge, Colorado. Psychedelics Today out.